As with rhythm, things go wrong with texture and with harmony when we either do too much or we do too little. In other words, we fill up too much space or we leave gaps. A typical example of this would be keyboard players who, because they have the whole range of the instrument at their disposal, may well fill up too much space. They might take up too much of the high space or just play too much in those mid and high registers, and that leaves no space for the electric guitar. Or they might play too much in their low registers and play too heavily right down at the low end of the keyboard, and that tends to take over from the bass or swamp the bass or make that a little bit fuzzy. As you can see from the graphic on the screen, if keyboards play too much as well as swamping the electric guitar, they may well cut across anything that orchestral instruments are trying to do because they sit in that same range. The absolute key is to adjust your playing to the number of instruments that you have sitting in that sonic space. So if the keyboard is the only instrument there, you can afford to play more than if you have 3 or 4 other instruments sitting in that same space.
With electric guitar, the same rules that apply to keyboards apply to electric. This is particularly noticeable on distorted sounds. So where they're very, very big, they can swamp certainly the keyboards and anything that's going on. But that sense of aggression that they provide, if you do that too early in the song, it ruins the entire dynamic. One of the main problems with the distortion is people use way too much drive on it. So if you listen to some of those classic rock records, the amount of overdrive they've got on that sound isn't nearly much as you'd expect. What you actually need something that's got a bit of a mid-hump that cuts through the sound. This is why that tube screamer pedal that a lot of people tend to use works so well in the kind of the praise and worship genre, because it's not too heavy sounding, but it'll actually cut to the front of the mix. If you use one of those kind of metal sounds that's mid-scooped, you'll get a lot of kind of nasty sounding drive, but it won't actually be that intelligible in the mix and actually very difficult for your sound man to get to grips with. Also, playing an electric guitar in the same way as playing an acoustic guitar, so just strumming all the way through, is fine if you've got a really outward end bit of the song where it's really abandoned, but for the rest of the song it will just literally swamp everything, so it won't create any room or space. So think about the textures you're playing and when you actually play if you're going to strum. Just like we talked about with orchestral instruments, if you're playing lead licks, so particular kind of linear lines or some kind of motif, just be careful that doesn't cut across the vocals, because again it will make it less intelligible for the congregation to be able to worship to and understand. Also be really careful about the delays and reverbs you use. Now, delay as a sound is used an awful lot in this current genre of worship music because it adds a sense of texture and it's really, really useful, particularly when you put it behind an overdrive pedal. But firstly, be making sure that whatever delay you put on there, it has to be in time with the tempo of the song. It has to lock the drummer. If it's too slow, it'll sound a bit mushy. If it's too fast, it'll sound like the song's running away with itself. So I'd encourage you to get a tap tempo delay so you can actually sync with the drummer, especially if they're going out of time by accident. Also with reverbs and delays, if you use too much of it, it will create a kind of washed sort of sound. So that actually means you'll back yourself up in the mix of the sound in the church hall itself, and it'll be very, very hard for your sound man to bring you to the front. So don't use too much of it unless you want to create those kind of ambient sounds where you're in the background. Lastly, try and be respectful to the genre of the song that you're actually playing. So if it's a typical guitar-based rock song, that's fine, but if it's something more hymny-based or something more keyboard-based, sit behind the keyboard, serve what they're doing, try not to be too overdriven, try not to be too prominent, and respect the genre of the song so it sounds right.
Next, we'll think about the bass guitar. Now, it's very easy as a bass player to either leave a gap or to fill up too much space. If bass players play too high and play too many notes up high, you risk leaving a gap at the bottom between the drums and the rest of the instruments, so the sound isn't full. On the other hand, even if you're playing in the right register, you can simply play too many notes for the style. It's very easy to want to play all the time and to play more and more and more, but filling up everything just tends towards a messy sound and one which is far too full. As bass players, we need to understand that our predominant role is to fill the low parts of the sound and to fill them simply in a way that complements the groove and just provides the very framework for the other harmonic instruments on top of us. Too many high notes or too many notes prevent us from doing that. High notes can work in a particularly quiet passage of a song if there are no drums, but as a general rule, we want to be solid and low.
One of the main problems with acoustic is very often that the sound techs actually mix it too high in the mix. If you've got a full band, then one of the things that acoustic really should be doing is just providing this subliminal essence of what the rhythm's doing. It should actually bond with what you can hear of the hi-hats, so it should be at the same sort of level. If it's way too high, then it swamps absolutely everything. Now that might not be something you can control, but it is something that's worth having a chat to your sound person about and try and make sure that there's a decent mix that mixes you and the drums at the same sort of level, but not too high above all the other instruments. Of course, one of the other things that causes textural problems in our mix is, again, random strumming patterns. These might be out of time or even in time, but they just don't line up with the groove. And the trouble with that against the texture of the sound is you're adding notes that doesn't allow anybody else any space to add their textural elements, and it actually gets confused to the listener. Now, we've covered most of the instruments, but what we haven't covered is backing vocals. And backing vocals actually occupies quite a small space in the sonic spectrum. What it's really trying to do is provide additional support and weight and emphasis to the lead vocal. And that can be quite a frustrating experience, especially if you're a better vocalist than the main lead vocalist or worship leader. However, your role is that support role. Your role is to bring glory to God by helping people to understand and bring meaning to the lyrics and song as the congregation are worshipping to it. So your role shouldn't be about letting your voice stick out above the worship leader or lead vocalist in any way. So if you're going to support the melody as your main role and emphasise key lyrics, the main thing that you've got to be doing is harmony. Now I'm realising there are a number of people watching this that may be not comfortable with singing harmony, that actually sing as a backing vocalist. But you've got to be very, very careful, because if you've got two people singing melody, then that actually confuses the sound of the congregational listener. It's a bit like a blurry photographic negative that's slightly out of focus. So if you really can't harmonise, I'd suggest you only sing on the biggest key, most emphasising lyrics to give them extra punch. But realistically, if you take seriously your role as a backing vocalist, harmony is one of the first things you've got to learn, and it really is an essential part of your kit bag. Again, if you struggle with that, we've got all sorts of resources at Musicademy to help you. So we've got our main vocals course, which teaches you about harmony and the construction of harmonies and understanding the music theory behind it. We've also got our harmony and backing vocals DVDs, which gives you 10 songs per DVD with a choice of 2 different harmonies per song. So you can hear how harmonies are constructed, you can learn to copy and sing them, and ultimately learn about the craft of being a backing vocalist. But ultimately, whatever you're doing as a backing vocalist or a background vocalist, your role is to blend with what the lead singer's doing, to serve that lead vocal. So you need to be able to see their lips. You need to see where they're coming off and on the words. You need to try and anticipate where they're pronouncing consonants, so you can do it exactly the same time as them. If they lengthen a note at the end of a lyric, then you need to lengthen it with them. If they shorten it, you need to shorten it with them. But you need to be hand in glove with what the lead singer's doing and try to blend your voice so it sounds as one, but a thickened version of that lead vocal.
Overall, what we really want to emphasise is that, again, this is about playing simple parts well. Just because we're adding texture and adding interest doesn't mean that we need to do things which are beyond our capabilities or which really push too hard against the boundaries of the music that we're trying to play. If you play a simple part well at the right time, that will be the most effective thing that you can do. Finally on this, we've said it before, but you need to listen all of the time. If you're listening, you'll be able to fill the gaps where somebody else has moved, and that will create the best overall texture as we don't leave any holes in our sound.